I know it was Purdue, but I would call that the most complete game out of the Buckeyes this season by far. So, are the Buckeyes getting better? And will there be enough Buckeyes on the field to get better? We will talk Penn State, of course, the first Titanic matchup of the season in Columbus. And we do it here every week with you. We hope you got the notification to join us live. Of course, that's why we say every week, please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Here, bright and early on a Monday with all of you, here the voice of college football. Tony Gerdeman right next to me, Buckeye Huddle, the Buckeye Weekly podcast that comes your way in season just about every day. Buckeye Weekly podcast, college football playbook here on YouTube. Steve Hellwagon, 247 Sports. Bucknuts.com is the place to be. Guys, how we doing today?
Good.
Doing great.
I realized as I started to talk that the mouth is coming along this morning. It's taking a little time to warm up and wake up, but talk about this one should do the trick. So, Tony, before we turn our attention toward Penn State, and folks, we do have a special guest coming on from 247 Sports a little bit later to rep the Penn State side. I thought that was a complete game. You were not going to shut another team down completely, but Ohio State did it just about as well as possible. They gave up a couple plays on the first drive, a missed field goal. Oh, yeah, and I understand Purdue had students out there practicing and doing field goal attempts at halftime. They probably should have taken notice. And then the first half ended the same way. But other than that, the Ohio State defense was pretty airtight, and the offense found a running game.
Yeah, Ohio State defense gave up only 3 drives of 40 yards or more, and a couple of those ended up in missed field goals, if not all 3 of them. And anytime you hold a team to 7 points on the road, that's going to be a very good defensive performance overall. Offensively, you mentioned the running game. Losing Chip Trayanum, and who knows when he'll be back. I mean, he was on the sideline for the entirety after that game, so it didn't seem like it was too bad, but you saw the immediate aftermath of his hit, and you're not going to be playing again in that game when you try to run off the field and fall to the ground. But Dallin Hayden, I went back and, that was the most efficient game for an Ohio State running back this year in terms of success rate of running the ball, of guys who've had more than 10 carries or more in a game. That was the best outing for the Buckeyes this year. And it's too bad that it takes so many injuries to get Dallin Hayden in the game, and they're trying to redshirt him. They want to redshirt him. They now have 2 more games that he can play. But at some point, you have to look at it and see if he is the most effective guy, then what are you holding him back for? Like, if he's the most effective guy, then he needs to play. But clearly they don't believe he is, and this was just a 1-game sample. But like I said, he had the highest efficiency rating, success rate for an Ohio State running back this year in his one game. And I don't know if we'll get to find out if that's just a 1-game measure, because they expect Travion Henderson to be back. They expect Mayan Williams to be back, perhaps. Like, we don't know exactly. They've never told us what's wrong with either one of those guys. And Chip, like I said, Chip was on the sideline, so if they get everybody back, does that mean Dallin Hayden goes right back to the sideline? I guess.
I would hesitate real quick, Steve. I would hesitate saying this as some kind of official statement that should be on a scouting report. But then again, when I've seen scouting reports, there are statements like this. Dallin Hayden just looks better running the ball. He just looks like he has a feel. He has instincts. He has a lot of skill set that goes in a number of directions that could be useful to trying to win a championship. All right, Steve.
Well, I agree with a lot of what Tony said. As some of you, I may have said on this show last week, I was not at the game. First game I've missed in 22 years because my niece was getting married in Washington, D.C. And so we were all out there. We're staying at a Marriott in Bethesda, Maryland. And we asked them very kindly, could we get a TV with Peacock on it? And they told us, no, you may not. And, it was just a big rigmarole trying to get it worked out. I'm sure at the bar, they probably had a streaming TV, but, we had probably 5-10 of us that wanted to watch the game, obviously. So what we did was we found a Buckeye watch bar there in the neighborhood. Quite frankly, it was a World of Beer in Bethesda, Maryland, and they worked really hard. Got the Peacock game on for us. I watched the first half there, and then I came back and streamed it onto my TV in my room. In the second half, as I was getting ready for the wedding. So I watched the game, and we can get into the Peacock broadcast later, but that was kind of the planes, trains, and automobiles version of trying to watch a game on streaming in 2023. We're not quite there yet with the technology or the clearance, nationwide of every television in the country, can just hit a button and get this game. We're not quite there just yet, but I was very impressed. We're watching the first drive, and Purdue's marching it right down the field in 11 and 12-yard chunks. And you're like, oh, Knowles, the defense, here they go. And then they get down, close to the red zone and slam the car door on Purdue's head. And then the defense went 3 and out. Great pressure on the quarterback. A batted pass, a Tui Maloau sack in there as well. And you could just see Purdue with each play getting a little bit more demoralized as it happened. Their defense had to be like, what the heck, guys? You can't hold the ball for even 2 minutes, and give us a chance to get a break. And Ohio State scored touchdowns on 3 of their first 4 possessions and fumbled at the 1-yard line on the other one. The Devin Brown wrinkle was outstanding, in my opinion, just kind of a new thing to throw in there. Now Penn State and everybody else they have to play the rest of the season has to spend a half hour each day in practice just working against the Wildcat quarterback in the red zone. And after the second series, I said to my buddy, this looks like it might work down there. And I said, now they need him to throw it out of that formation just to have that on tape as well. So to me, I thought this was all systems go. I mean, it was a rainy day, so it got a little bit wonky in the second half. Tony, you were there. You know how bad that was. I really couldn't tell on television. But to me, I thought this was about an 8 or a 9 out of a scale of 1 to 10 of what you would hope for. As bad as the Maryland game was with all the, self-inflicted errors and mistakes, unforced errors is what they call them in tennis, where you just mishit the ball and knock it out of bounds or whatever. Ohio State had, dozens of those against Maryland. There were very few of those, it seemed. And even when they did, when Josh Simmons grabbed the guy and, flung him or tackled him for a holding penalty that eventually forced the first punt of the game, Ryan Day was right there with Josh Simmons right here telling him exactly what he thought of that. So to me, they were in Penn State mode, I think, finally, for the first time this season, and that was something that we needed to see.
Yeah, and good job by Quinn Temple, Ohio State's get-back coach, to keep Ryan Day from getting a penalty this week. So
get back.
That's always a plus. I like the creativity of the offense. They ran some counters that were hitting big for Dallin Hayden. We haven't seen too many of those this season in terms of what they were running with the guard and the tackle pulling. So that was good. I think when we talked to Justin Fry earlier last week, he said they're going to have to change some scheme things because there's obviously some things that the offensive line doesn't do well. So kind of just cut that out, and then you go back to you find what they do well and you do more of that. I do wonder, sitting there with a couple of guys in the press box, when we saw Devin Brown come out, it was like, why do this now? Actually, I had Pat Murphy on one side, and I think Kevin Noon on the other, and Patrick's like, why do you bring out Devin Brown in this game now? Why do you show this to Penn State? And then
because it was Purdue.
Because my answer was they're not going to do it against Penn State. So you just make Penn State deal with it and work on it. But if it's effective, then yeah, you're going to use it. Now, the throwing aspect of it, that was a scary throw to G. Scott that could have been, or whoever it was out there, it could have been a pick six in the flat. So they need to get that squared away. And not that Kyle McCord was perfect with his throws, because he wasn't. But there's a lot to lack in terms of the paring things down and what works and sticking with them. I'll also say defensively, it's starting to look more and more like Cody Simon's taking that job from Steel Chambers. Steel Chambers may still be the starter. Cody Simon played more at that will linebacker, or as much, and then played some later in the game, maybe at middle. But I like that addition of Cody Simon in there because the linebacker's been a little bit up and down, and he missed some tackles as well, but he also made some plays. And I think you're getting some plays made from him that is going to keep him back. It's going to keep him in the game. They're going to keep putting him in there. And at some point, I wonder if they're even going to take him out.
Yeah, it was interesting. I'll just throw in on the Brown wrinkle. They score the first time he's in there, then he fumbles it at the goal line, and then he got back in there another chance after that. I think he scored on the third try. So that was interesting, and whether they would, quote, risk that against a hard-hitting Penn State defense, I don't know. But, again, it just shows you that even against Purdue, how much ball security, how important it is in Big Ten football. And my buddy and I, again, we're sitting there at the World of Beer watching the game, and I'm just like, this is Big Ten football, is what we were watching, just a little bit of smash mouth and that thing with Treyana, my goodness, that was two locomotives. That was like the scene out of The Sopranos with the two locomotives just banging into one another. I mean, that was just nuts. And, no wonder he came off the field woozy. It was a clean play by their guy. And, two guys actually collided with Treyana on that play. But, it was irresistible force, immovable object colliding at 100 miles per hour. So, you hope that he's okay and that's not a lasting thing. And I would tend to doubt that he will be back this week. If we want to touch on the injuries real quick, I do believe Travion Henderson will play this week. I think it was a precaution. I think they saw a grass field, potentially rainy day, and it had rained on that field overnight too. So it ain't like it was a perfect track to begin with. And I just think they decided, we don't know what the nature of it is. You hope it's not the foot again. But I just think that they decided we'll beat these guys without him. And Mine Williams, no idea what's up with him. He's just been a bit player to this point anyway. So I don't, really know. Although without Trey on him, he does add the power component. So you hope he's back. Emeka Buka did not even travel to Purdue. Maybe that was done so he would continue to get round-the-clock treatment so that he'd be ready for Penn State. I don't know, but that one seems a bit murky to me. I don't know what's going on. And Denzel Burke leaving the game, that happened during the portion of the game when I was back at the hotel, getting the tie ready, getting ready for the wedding, et cetera, et cetera. I have no idea what happened to him. Didn't see it. Don't know if he was carted off, walked off, walked off with the guys carried him off or whatever. I have no clue. Tony, what happened to Denzel Burke? And do you expect him to play?
Well, he walked off under his own power. He just got undercut a little. It didn't look like anything. There's nothing special about it, nothing nefarious about it. He got up and he just looked kind of puzzled in terms of that something didn't feel right or whatever. And he walked off. And at that point, the game was essentially over anyway. So, you don't need to go back in. But he did go into the tent. Then he may have gone to the locker room. I don't remember seeing him again out there, but just the way he left, it didn't seem bad. But also Ryan Day, normally if something doesn't seem like, he'll be back, then he'll give an answer. He gave no answers after the game because
he was shutting all the injury talk. He shut it completely down. You got nothing from the coach on the record about the injuries. Poop on Penn State. They ain't going to know nothing about the status of any of these guys until 11:58 a.m. on Saturday. So there you go.
No, 10 a.m. 2 hours.
Well, even then, who gives a crap what they put in that report? They'll call them, probable, questionable, questionable. Maybeable. Who knows? So I don't know.
Have you guys looked through those reports? I forgot about those.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we get them at 10 a.m. I mean, I don't know. The guys they say are out typically have not played, but beyond that, Henderson was questionable. So,
and then you look because every week there's going to be somebody new on there almost.
Yeah. Somebody new pops on there. And they lead the world for the second year in a row in running backs who have finished the previous week's game with no apparent injury, no apparent harm, and then out. Just not playing. Not in uniform, not playing. Like, does this happen in practice? I mean, what the hell are you doing to bang up your running backs to where Henderson played until the very last play of the Notre Dame game, and they put Treonum in the game for the last play, and then Henderson suddenly 2 weeks later can't play against Maryland, and then didn't play this past week. Like, what the hell? I don't get it. I do not. And it was like that all last season. A guy would play to the very last play of a game, then 7 days later was out, and you're like, what is this? I mean, I guess it's just stress fractures and things that mount up, and people. I can't explain it. In all the years of covering football, ordinarily, like Emeka Egbuka, you saw that injury, he left the field. Denzel Burke, you saw that injury, he left the field. There was nothing like that with Henderson or Williams. Nothing that I've seen. Treonum, you saw that. He got hurt, left the field. There's a reason why he's not going to play. We have no idea what's wrong with Henderson or Williams. Zero.
Yeah, in terms of these running back injuries, I think this could turn out to be a blessing in disguise as long as there are no more running back injuries, because number one, gets my guy Dallin Hayden possibly into the mix more. I just have been flummoxed ever since that Maryland game and then going into the Michigan game about why he's absent from all of this. And I get the pecking order, and I don't know. I hope it's not any type of narrative that they want to send a message to recruits that they're going to stay in order and you're not going to get leaped, you're not going to get jumped or anything like that. And then number two, even before all that took place, you could just tell with Xavier Johnson. Of course, Egbuka wasn't there, but he's typically the wide receiver running threat, that this has forced them to get creative in the running game beyond just the personnel switches. They were already thinking, okay, we need a running game from somewhere. Devin Brown, Egbuka, as we typically get it from him, Xavier Johnson. This is what we're going to do. We're going to get creative.
Yeah, I like it. And they did that against Michigan and Georgia, where you got to get it from somewhere. And I like the inclusion of Xavier Johnson in the running game, getting back to the Urban Meyer H-back situation where the slot guy can carry the ball, and Xavier Johnson can do it the way Urban Meyer liked it, which was between the tackles, and do it out of the backfield. Mecca is mainly just a jet sweep guy, but the usage, the ability to put him wherever is great. If they could have somebody more dynamic, that would be even better than Xavier. But he's very good at what they ask him to do. But he's a sixth-year guy. Had the ball hit him in the face on one of the throws downfield from Kyle McCord. So, like, you're still missing something when he's out there, but you're also getting something when he's out there, and you're getting the versatility. And he was productive with the football. And I'm with you. Like, you're looking for different options. You're looking for different things to do with the running game, how to get yards. And when everybody is healthy, it would just be like, well, there's running the ball and there's throwing quick screens outside. And the quick screens outside aren't always all that effective, but they count that as part of the running game. And if that's all you're relying on, clearly it's not been enough this season. So getting Xavier more involved, getting whomever more involved, getting more creative, finding runs that work. Now Penn State has seen everything they've done so far. So will there be something more for Penn State? I think is going to be something else to watch, but the more creative, the better, in my opinion.
Yeah, Xavier Johnson, 5 carries for 39 yards is pretty good, 8 yards a clip, and 1 catch for 21 yards. You're right. He had a pass that should have been completed that he dropped. There were several drops on the day. It looked bad again at the beginning. The first 2 passes were incomplete, just the same as the Maryland game when they, had to punt it away pretty quickly and then botched the punt snap, and they're down 7-0, in the blink of an eye. This week, he then completed a pass to Marvin Harrison for 15 yards, kind of on an out route for a first down, and then McCord was off and rolling. I thought after that, through basically his 3 quarters of work, he was fabulous on the whole, given everything that was going on, with different personnel and the rain and the wind. I mean, you were there, you would know better than I. They said on television that it was kind of a blustery day. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But yeah, I like the diversity. It was the best called game of the season, in my opinion, for Ohio State offensively. I mean, they did put up 56 points or whatever it was against Western Kentucky, but they offered very little resistance. So Purdue, at least, has had a few games where they've played some pretty good defense leading into this. So to me, I felt this was the showing that you had to have to get ready to go play Penn State. And that to me was a big step forward.
Yeah, and the defensive line took advantage of a bad offensive line and some injuries on the offensive line. First time Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau have had a sack in the same game since last year. They've done it now 3 times in their respective careers, 2 of 2022 against Maryland and 2021 against Maryland. And now I think this may have been the first game where they both had multiple sacks in the game. So getting hot at the right time, but against, like I said, a really pedestrian offensive line when it comes to protecting the quarterback. And Hudson Card, he hears voices anyway in the pocket, and with that offensive line, you're going to. And I thought they did a good job. They did everything they needed to, and really having Devin Mockabee rush for over 100 yards. That was a very quiet, like 114 yards or whatever. He had a couple of like a 21-yard run and some. I think as Ohio State is preparing for the pass because Purdue's down, they're getting some easy runs from Mockabee, but nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing there.
A lot of it came after the game was decided. They didn't score till it was 34-0, although they were in position to score several times and had 3 field goals. That poor guy, Macias, the kicker, I mean, what a terrible bad luck day he had. I mean, they had the ball at the 1-yard line, get pushed back with penalties, and he doinks a field goal off the upright. I mean, that just, it was that kind of day for Purdue. Poor Ryan Walters, he got his first real taste of what Big Ten, what life in the big city is all about.
Yeah, Steve, you would have enjoyed it because, as Mark said, twice during that game they had students come in and kick field goals. One of them was like for leasing a car, and you had to make like a 30-yarder and a 40-yarder, and the dude did, and banged the 40-yarder in off the crossbar, and they're just pulling kids out of the stands to kick, and they're making them. And yet your own field goal kicker could. And the one that he blasted off of the upright, that goalpost was still shaking like 5 minutes later because it was so hard.
It was dead on. Yeah.
The kid who's practicing 2 hours a day, 5 days a week can't make it, but the kid from Chumley Hall comes in there and hits the big. Hey, we got a news flash for you here. We're going to break the embargo a couple minutes early, but Ohio State at Wisconsin next week, 7:30 p.m. NBC Sports primetime. And it will be the 5th time in the last 6 visits for Ohio State to Wisconsin for it to be a night game. The one exception was in 2012, a game played in November that Ohio State won. It was a 3:30 game. Ohio State's 9-0 against Wisconsin since 2011, and I feel a little bit better about that game after watching the way Iowa in Iron Sheik fashion humbled the Wisconsin Badgers. I will humble you, 15-6. What a mess! What a disgusting mess! And Iowa, Minnesota this week, the over-under is 32 points for that game. Like the second or third lowest over-under in recorded history. So Ohio State at Wisconsin on whatever the date that is. 28th, will be a 7:30 game on NBC. So I'll be getting out of my hotel room at about 5 p.m. and heading over to the stadium. And there you go.
And Tanner Mordecai broke his hand. And so he's out for the foreseeable future. So that's not good for Wisconsin. And in some ways, it's not good for Ohio State. It's good in the immediate for Ohio State. But when it comes down to if Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State all have one loss to each other, then you're basing who goes to the Big Ten championship game on the record of your Big Ten West opponents.
Iowa's going to
Right.
have a better record than Wisconsin, and so Penn State may have a leg up in this.
Because now, because I went through and looked at the records of the Big Ten West opponents. So Penn State's Big Ten West opponents right now are 5-6. Ohio State's are 4-6, and Michigan's are 3-7. So Michigan is pretty much out of the picture if this thing ends up in a three-way tie, because they don't play a Wisconsin or an Iowa. Their best Big Ten West team is Nebraska, Minnesota.
Nobody.
Like
His nobody.
So, and for there to be a three-way tie,
How wretched is it?
Yeah, it's bad. So for there to be a three-way tie, Ohio State has to beat
It's
Wisconsin.
hideous.
And
it is hideous. That's a good word for it. Hideous. Because it's been bad in the past.
They're on the street corner handing out tickets to the Big Ten championship game to the Iowa people, and they're like, "Nah, bro, I'm good. All you got to do is drive 4 hours down the road to Indianapolis, and you can go to the game." Nah, man, thank you. Thank you, but no, thank you. I appreciate it. 44-5, your final from Indianapolis tonight, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who the opponent is. Whether it's Michigan, Ohio State, or Penn State, it's 44-5. Just mark it.
That's a good score, Steve. That's
they're going to get a safety.
I'll get that safety.
That defense is going to get a safety. Don't worry about it. But yeah.
But my goodness,
what a godforsaken mess.
I've sat here and posted a number of videos defending the Big Ten Western Division in previous years because the ugliness of the games has been a little overstated in regards to the results. The results of the league, the division in the past has not been that awful. Actually, they have a really good bowl winning percentage. Obviously, they don't play anybody any good in bowl games, but they drag around the likes of Syracuse and Georgia Tech and those teams in bowl games and beat them up. They've got a really good bowl winning percentage, but the last 2 years can't be defended. They go outside of the conference and they just get hammered. They get killed, and then they produce these games. And yes, what is the point spread going to be in Indianapolis regardless? And I got to think, regardless of this tie-breaking system, that if Ohio State's sitting at home at 11-1, let's say Iowa runs the table. They should run the table. They should be 11-1. Their schedule's awful. They would not have played a ranked team in the regular season or anything close to a ranked team. And they pull off the best case scenario, I got to think, guys, for them is they beat a Penn State in a rematch, of course. And then I guess they get an Ohio State loss at Wisconsin. That would knock out the Buckeyes. But if they get this three-way tie, the teams sitting at home have to still have a better resume, especially Ohio State with the Notre Dame game, than Iowa.
You can't put Iowa in the playoffs no matter what they do from here on out. And barring a 59-0 win in the Big Ten championship game, like there is a body of work, and you can't leave a one-loss Big Ten championship team out. I think you can, and it's that. Was it there's also the we just don't want that. We the eye test type of thing, like. Come on, like we know it when we see it, that sort of thing. The Supreme Court, like we know a bad team when we see it. And now they have played one ranked team, Purdue, Penn State beating them pretty soundly. So
I meant a win, ranked.
Yeah. And so they need more than a Big Ten championship game win, in my opinion.
They needed. They're 6-1, could end up 11-2 if they win out and lose in the Big Ten championship game. I mean, their remaining games are Minnesota at home should win, Northwestern at home should win, Rutgers at home should win. Oh gosh, this schedule, this can't be right. It's got to be mismarked. Yeah. But Minnesota, Northwestern, Rutgers, Illinois, Nebraska, that should be 5 wins for them. Maybe they lose one, but they still go to Indianapolis even at 4-1. So they could end up 11-2 or 10-3. And they said before the season that Brian Ferentz needed to average 25 points a game to keep his job. They've had one 26-point game and one 41-point game. And otherwise, they've been, and this was the, 15-6. They beat Wisconsin. So good God. But yeah, if that win's not going to help, well, I mean, if they're geez, if they're 11-1, it would help. I suppose it would help because they'll probably be ranked 15th in the country at least. But you know, I don't know. They're the worst number 25 ranked team in the country in the history of the world, I think. But
you can't fire an offensive coordinator that just went 10-2 or 11-1.
And won his division. Division.
I'm going to stick up a little bit for Iowa here. It is atrocious. It's unbelievably bad on offense. But to the contrary, I don't think their defense and special teams get enough credit because they're incredibly good. They are incredibly good. You can march anybody out there and they're going to stay in the game. It just is uncanny how they produce points and figure out ways to stay in a game and just are so fundamentally sound, so good.
It's trestle ball on steroids is what it is. I mean,
it's way beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Ohio State had great defenses, but this is something, a next level. I mean, although they did give up 31 to Penn State, but geez, I mean, when your offense gets 4 first downs, it was kind of like, what teams have done to Ohio State this year to stay in games or to make it not look as good is they've sustained drives against Ohio State and won the battle of field position. Well, when Iowa doesn't sustain drives against a good opponent, then Penn State had great field position from I just turned that game on from about the beginning of the second quarter on. Penn State was in plus territory, so it was not as big a task to score 31 points. They're not driving 80 yards to score 31 points. They're having to drive like half the field, which makes it a little easier to do.
Their offense ran 33 plays in that game. And as you stated, 4 first downs and 76 total yards. Your defense can only hold up for so long under those conditions. And one more note on Iowa, and we'll get back to our Buckeye show, is this past weekend. Yeah, this 25 points per game. I just so much wish that would have been an offensive statistic, as it should be. The defense is scoring the points. They had a 75-yard touchdown run. They produced one offensive play the entire game, 75-yard touchdown run or something in that range. Other than that, they had 37 yards passing. They had a safety. Every other field goal produced was like a negative yardage drive or a 9-yard drive. Just it's incredible. Incredible.
It is, and it becomes something to watch because of the unwatchableness of it. It's you come watch this. You've never seen anything like this before, and it's like a freak show at the circus. Yeah, it's like you're watching it like this, but you're gonna pay to watch. Like, here's $5. Show me the pig-faced football team, and boom, there you are watching the Iowa offense try. And with their new quarterback is completing 30% of his passes in the last 3 games as a starter, and they've won them all.
Saturday's offensive performance has officially done it. Iowa has dropped to dead last in the nation in offense, below Eastern Michigan.
Unreal. When you're below Eastern Michigan, that's when you know.
They could go 11-1 and be 133 in total offense. All right, Tony, I don't know if you had a chance to prep a lot of Penn State. What I would say here is we know the talent of Drew Allar, although he's had his road struggles against the likes of Illinois and Northwestern in the Big Ten. The running game has not been as dynamic as I had thought it would be, which is supposed to feature the best offensive line during the James Franklin era, and 2, of course, dynamite freshman, now sophomore running backs. I think the outside threats aren't what they've been in the past with Jahan Dotson and others, Chris Godwin. They don't have that guy, it appears, and they've got another tight end who should be playing on Sundays at some point.
Yeah, you say Drew Allar, they've got the talent there. I agree he's talented, but it's not. I don't think it's showing offensively yet. You look at the number of downfield plays, and I've not gotten to see Penn State much this year, but you look at the numbers, and they've got one play of 40 yards this season on offense compared to 11 for Ohio State. They're not stretching the field nearly enough. As you said, they're not running the ball very well. And I feel like they're getting overlooked because people aren't watching them. So they just assume the offense is doing well. And you see 63 points against UMass or whatever, and you see 60-something against Delaware, and that's who they are offensively. But they need to do something more, and they're doing more than Iowa, but that's not necessarily a measuring stick. So I think Allar, they have talent. I'm not sure about the receivers, how talented they are. I don't know if maybe that's what's holding them back right now, but I'm surprised at the lack of explosion offensively this season.
Well, Tony, for as much as we appreciate your Penn State breakdown, we got the guy here who knows a little bit more about those Nittany Lions, who are off to an undefeated start, of course. We got Mark Brennan here from Lions 247 Sports. Mark, how you doing this afternoon?
Great. I'm glad this game week is finally here, man. This is going to be a lot of fun.
I'm telling you, we were just running through the Penn State offense, and you can let us know better than certainly us and our audience here that has been watching Ohio State football start to finish. Starting with that game against West Virginia, we had heard in the offseason that this would be the best Penn State offensive line that we've seen since Joe Pa. Has that materialized?
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's also been the deepest offensive line, and that's ended up being important because they lost one of their starting guards in Landon Tangwell, who had to retire from the sport. And then the guy who replaced him, J.B. Nelson, has missed the last game and a half, and they were able to actually bring some younger players up, and it's helped. So not only are you looking at Olu Fashanu, who's, I think everybody's projecting as a top 10 pick in the NFL draft, but the level of depth they had, to me, I think was at a level that we haven't really seen since those mid-90s teams. So that's been really important for them. But I overheard, definitely. I mean, if you're looking at one thing from this offense, they've put up a ton of points. They have this ridiculous streak of 30-point games, but the explosive plays, just have not been there. And I think the key question is, have they just been winning so easily that they haven't had to show it? Or is it just not there? And I don't think we're going to really know that until this Saturday, when I have a feeling they're going to have to open up their entire playbook.
Mark, great to see you.
Yes,
We've been friends and acquaintances since the mid-90s. That goes back a few years. What was your first year covering Penn State football on a full-time basis?
1988.
Wow.
So, yeah, I just turned 60, so I've been in the game for a while. And believe me, knowing that I was turning 60, there were some people on the network who gave me a pretty good hard time about it. But yeah, so I've seen a lot of Penn State football, but it's fun. I mean, I live in State College, so it's a cool place to live. It's been a good program to cover, other than a couple years there. But overall, I've been in it for a while, and have always valued your friendship and across multiple networks, and have always appreciated the professional work that we've seen from you in particular, Steve, and Bucknuts in general.
Well, thank you. I think we can all, I'm 55, so we have to be thankful that CBS does not age discriminate. So that's a good thing. But James Franklin, 10th year, and obviously just the one win over Ohio State, and they play every year. And what's crazy is we all got up in arms, at least some of us did, that they were ending the Penn State series with the jumble with USC and UCLA joining the conference and the way things were going to be mixed around. But then they bring Oregon and Washington in, they put all the chips back in the bag, and they shuffled them up. And now Ohio State and Penn State are still going to play the next 2 years. So it's not, the hiatus doesn't begin till 2026. But at any rate, with Franklin, I know there's a glass ceiling, or it seems like there's been a glass ceiling that they punched up against to try and get into the playoff and all these other things. And in your mind, is this a team that has what it takes to win at least one of these two showdown games and at least get into a tiebreaker scenario, which we laid those out with Iowa beating Wisconsin? Penn State's now kind of got the upper hand in the tiebreaker scenario.
Yeah, I mean, and sooner or later you have to, right? I mean, Penn State hasn't beaten Ohio State and Michigan when both teams were ranked since 2008. So this predates Franklin. I mean, this isn't only a James Franklin thing. This is something where, Penn State comes into the Big Ten in the early 90s and in 94 runs the table. And I think everybody thought, oh, man, this is just going to be same old, same old. But clearly, when you look at the Big Ten, and with all respect to what Michigan's been able to do the last couple years, the team you have to beat to prove that you're the man is Ohio State. And this is the most talent that James Franklin has had. And don't read that the wrong way, because yes, when they had Saquon Barkley and Chris Godwin and Micah Parsons and all those players, they had great individual players in different spots. I'm talking about depth. I'm talking about across the board. I think if you project out where a lot of these guys are going to be when it comes around to the NFL draft, if you look at it really closely, the depth of talent is there. So everything is in place. And I think the other thing about Penn State, Ohio State is that Penn State has been there in these games. Penn State has led these games in the fourth quarter and let them slip away. And you could look at it a different way. You can say that Ohio State has grabbed those games and seized them and won them. But yeah, to be at that level, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And did you already say that? You have to be able to take care of business. And I think a lot of fans are looking at this. Listen, James Franklin is on any sort of hot seat, because I think any rational person, if they look at the dumpster fire that he inherited and able to get them to a Big Ten title as soon as they did, and able to establish the program where it is and improve the facilities and do all these things, he's done an unbelievable job. But everybody keeps talking about that next level. Well, this is where you have to take care of business against one of these two teams. And I think it's important this year, Steve and guys, because, when you expand the playoffs, then it's going to be much easier, obviously. I mean, for people to get in. But if you want to prove that you can be one of those teams, you got to beat at least one of these teams this year. And I think that's absolutely fair criticism. One thing I would say is that, it's going to be interesting to see, because I think they're in a better spot now defensively. I didn't dislike Brent Pry as a coach, but the job that Manny Diaz has been doing has been unbelievable. Now, that's going to be tested this week, but I think if you look at his body of work over the first two seasons, outside of that one terrible game at Michigan last year, they've done some pretty impressive things. And I think his offense is starting to come around and kind of click again outside of the big plays.
Losing what they did in the secondary and then not missing a beat, I think, is incredibly impressive. How much, because I write about Michigan every week as well, and they've played nobody offensively. Penn State is in that same boat. So how much Penn State leading the nation in yards given up and yards per play allowed. Ohio State's number 2 in yards per play allowed. I believe this is a legit defense, but have they been tested at any point by anybody? Like, what's been the biggest test for them offensively this season?
No, I mean, West Virginia scored 15 points, I think, and a guy from Delaware popped a 68-yard run or something. But it's like they're really talented, and it was kind of funny. They play this game against UMass, and I don't even know who the offensive coordinator of UMass is, but UMass kept trying to run wide, and it's like, the one thing, if you look at this team and where it struggled last year, it was people gashing them up the middle, especially Michigan, because they didn't have the biggest defensive tackles. And I think they've improved that. But, I mean, even Ohio State, I think, will have trouble attacking the edges. Trying to run wide against this team just doesn't work because it's super fast. And I think if you're going to beat them, it's going to be with the passing game, or it's going to be running up the gut. So I just think that level of speed at all three levels is what's been the real key. But no, they haven't been tested. We were just doing our own podcast, and I was asked, hey, what's the biggest question mark? It's like, yeah, these guys have been rolling through everybody. What's going to happen when they get punched in the mouth and have to make a play in the fourth quarter? They haven't. I mean, their starting defensive tackles last week played 13 and 14 snaps. They had the game against Iowa. Their defense, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think the defense played 32 or something snaps in the entire game. So they have been able to, but I think the positive is they have been able to limit how much their key defensive players have been out on the field. And if you take a look at the numbers, it's absolutely crazy. So if you look, let me scroll up here if you guys don't mind. I'm sorry I'm doing this as I'm on the air.
Go for it.
But yeah, their leading tackler through 6 games is Curtis Jacobs with 23 tackles. A dude from Iowa had 18 tackles in one game. I mean, and so you have Curtis Jacobs with 23. Dom DeLuca, former walk-on, has 16. And this isn't a negative for Penn State because they've not played guys. They've been like beating people, so badly that they've been able to rest these guys up. And I think where that could pay dividends, and we'll see. I think we'll find out this week. Number one, in the fourth quarter against an elite opponent, but number two, in late October, which we're hitting, and then late November, and then into November, when the strength of schedule really picks up.
33 plays against Iowa, 76 yards. You'll have to do the math for me, but I think that's pretty darn good. Maybe a yard and a half, 2.5 per play, if that. Mark, one quick one from me would be more about the defense that, there are a few teams across the nation that have NFL players on all 3 levels, just like packing out the unit. But it's not just that. These NFL draft boards love this Penn State defense. We're not just talking NFL projections. We're talking first, second rounders.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, and that's what I said, Manny Diaz, to me, and it started last year. They went out to Purdue and opened the season at Purdue. And James Franklin has this whole thing about them starting on the Big Ten and on the road like every year for the last, 30 years or something. I don't know what it is, but who cares where you're starting? You're going to end up playing the same number of games. But the one thing that jumped out to everybody in that game was, even with Joey Porter Jr. last year, they were rotating him out significantly. Kalen King didn't start the last game. I mean, that's how deep they are. And he's not afraid to use the depth. And I think one thing that if you saw it with Brent Pry is some of these guys, I think some of the times when they would get into the fourth quarter against an Ohio State, guys were just so gassed. So let's see if that actually makes a difference or not. It's kind of funny because somebody asked me last week, looking ahead to the Ohio State game, Ohio State's been in multiple close games, Mark. Do you think that's going to benefit them because Penn State has? And I said, well, the last 6 years, Penn State's been in a bunch of close games before playing Ohio State. It hasn't made a damn difference. So let's, maybe going with this approach is going to work. But in all seriousness, yeah, I mean, I think the amount of talent they have and the depth that they have and Manny Diaz's willingness to rotate guys in and rotate them out. When you watch this defense, there are going to be a couple of guys to really keep an eye on. One is Abdul Carter, because he can play either box linebacker position, and they play a lot of nickel. They play a lot of prowler, which is like 6 defensive backs. But Abdul Carter is one of those versatile pieces who can go almost anywhere. And one of their DBs, Johnny Dixon, he's not the high-profile guy that Kalen King is, but he will be everywhere. And again, he'll be on the field. He's going to play a ton of snaps, but they will play him up as their prowler, which is a defensive back that they'll bring up near the line of scrimmage, and they won't be afraid to rush him. But those are 2 real key guys to keep an eye on. When you talk about the depth that they have, those are 2 guys who will be on the field as much as anybody.
Mark, you mentioned James Franklin and the level of satisfaction from the fan base. Think about this. It's been 5 years. I believe it was after that 2018, comeback, Dwayne Haskins, 27-26, that he made the comment, Franklin, after the game, we're great, but they're elite and we need to get there. So there was already some built up angst and, hey, some patience running out. And that was 5 years ago. And here we are in 2023, and Penn State's still looking for a win for the first time since 16.
Yeah, one thing about Franklin, he's very good with the media, so I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but I think sometimes after games, like a lot of coaches, he says things that he wishes he didn't say. And that's one of those things that I'm sure, all these years later, he's probably wishing he didn't say. But it goes back to what we were talking about before. I mean, let's just be realistic about it. I mean, if you want to be the team in the Big Ten, you have to beat the team. And to me, with all due respect to Michigan, it's that team is still Ohio State. So let's see if he's able to actually get past that. And again, I think it's important to do it this year while you're still in the division. I think the division setup has been ridiculous for the Big Ten, like just stupid, because the East is so loaded. But it is what Penn State's had to deal with. And with this ending after this year, we think, because who knows, it could change in 2 months if they add 6 more teams. But with this ending this year, to be able to get at least one of these teams when they're good, they've beaten Michigan when Michigan hasn't been very good, but to get one of these teams when they're good is really important for him. And again, I'm not suggesting by a million miles that his job's on the line, but if you want to be considered at that level, and excuse me, he was the one who talked about being elite, you have to beat an elite team.
Got a quick stat for you, Mark, and then I'll cut these guys loose and they'll take us home. But with those 2 wins by Ohio State and Michigan last week, these 3 are 34-0 against the rest of the Big Ten. They've won 34 consecutive games since Penn State lost to Michigan State, the final game of 21. And just focusing on Ohio State, since they walked off the field against Purdue in 2018 in that shocking loss, they are 37-0 against the entire Big Ten outside of Michigan, 2-2 against Michigan, 37-0 against everyone else. Actually, if you measure the entire divisions against each other, they're almost 500 against each other. It's just where it counts, obviously, has not even been anywhere close.
Yeah. I just look at, and we talk about, the strength of these teams and everything else. I computed what the caliber of the opposing offenses has been for Penn State. And I think a couple of these teams like Iowa and Northwestern are in the 100s nationally. And the average ranking of those teams is like around 100. The average ranking of the teams Ohio State's played is around 70. And I only looked at the 5 FBS schools. Of course, both of them played an FCS school. Yeah. I don't know that means, the world or anything, but it does kind of speak to the fact that if there were anemic offenses that Penn State could find to play against, they certainly did play them. And we saw it last year up until the game where Ohio State played Maryland and then played Michigan and then played Georgia. Well, Penn State was a pretty good offense as well. But until that last quadrant of the season, Ohio State played nobody. I mean, some of the absolute worst offenses this year or any other year. And so I guess my question before I had one about Allar is this defense, can we take it, for real, what we're seeing? I mean, you beat Iowa 31-0, but, Iowa's proven they can hardly, 15 points. I mean, it's like, I don't know. What do you think?
Iowa's got a great punter, man. Iowa has a great punter. All right.
He's their best offensive weapon.
But no, I think if you dial back to what they did last year, after the losing to 2 of 3, and see what they did defensively overall, including against Utah, they've played pretty well. Have they played at a level of allowing whatever they're doing this year, which is what, 8 or 9 points? No,
yeah, absurd.
Not. I mean, yeah, but yeah. So to your point, I think part of it does have to do with the opponent, but I think they kind of set they started to set a tone toward the end of last season. And they actually, they carried that into the Utah game, knocked the quarterback out of that game, which you didn't want to see, but really kind of dominated that game. So I think overall, defensively, they've been pretty good since losing that 2 of 3 stretch in the middle of last season with Ohio State and Michigan, and I think Minnesota was in the middle of there. So I think overall, they've played pretty well defensively. That I don't think you could just look at this 6-game stretch and say, they haven't played anybody. I think if you look at the level of talent they have, it's pretty good. And again, it's going to be a completely different test this week. Absolutely no question about it.
I'll just throw in on Allar. A lot of angst in Ohio and Ohio State fans that Ohio State didn't, go after Allar or whatever, but they did have Stroud and they did have McCord in the fold at that time. McCord's now in his 3rd year at Ohio State. to your mind, what is it about Allar that has been, special as he's taken over, and how can he continue to grow? What's the next step for him after these first 5 or 6 games as the starter?
Yeah, one thing, just going back to the recruiting that you were talking about. I mean, remember that Penn State was in on him before. I mean, I think he was a 3-star when they got in, and they really set a tone there. And to some kids, that makes a difference. And I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that's wrong, but they were in on him before he became a 5-star and blew up, and everybody was kind of looking at him. But look at his numbers. I mean, he's, you're sitting there at, 12 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. I mean, for a first-year starter, I don't care who you're playing. And what he's done, he's been very patient. And I remember talking to James Franklin before the season, and one thing he said is, what we need for this kid to do is not be afraid to throw the ball away. And it's okay to settle for a punt, and that's what he's done. And if you look at their offense, and I'm not going to include last week's game because it was such a blowout, but overall, I don't know that before last week he threw more than 4 or 5 passes, more than 20 yards downfield all season. And I think one of them was his second pass of the year, which went for 72 yards to Keandre Lambert-Smith. But I'm saying that because I think what they've done is allowed him to succeed without taking a bunch of chances and build his confidence. He's only been sacked a handful of times. So they've put him in a position to be successful. And I think what he's done is he's bought into that. He's not forced things. He's if you talk to him after a game, he has those leadership qualities. He doesn't get frustrated if he doesn't have a big game, but Penn State still wins, or if he doesn't have a bunch of touchdown passes, but they still win. And you could just see kind of the level of confidence he's to this point. And again, we saw what happened with Penn State last year when Ohio State was able to get a little bit of a pass rush going. To this point, even when he's been hit, he's been kind of unflappable. So that, to me, has been the most impressive part of this kid so far. Everybody talks about how strong his arm is, and you will see him make throws. It's doesn't necessarily have to go 70 yards down the field. He can make throws on outs and stuff that you'll be like, wow. I mean, that arm strength is just unbelievable. But it's beyond that. I just think it's the way he carries himself, that he's, again, allowed himself to get into a position where he's not making the key mistakes that have taken this team apart, or that have cost it games, in the past, during the 17 years Sean Clifford career.
With that short passing game, is this a byproduct of coverage, or is this a byproduct of Drew Allar's preference? Because I've heard people talking about how much he's checking down and things like that. Is it just 2 safeties over top most of the time, and there's nothing downfield is not where you want to go, especially for a relatively young starting quarterback? That's one of the things that gets pounded into their brain. Don't throw into double coverage. And so you're kind of cautious by default. At what point does that caution start to go away and maybe the bravado start coming out?
Yeah, that's what everybody's wondering, right? Because it has been what you've been saying. Teams have really gone out of their way to do 2 things, limit the run as best they can, and then not be beaten deep. And to his credit, he's taken what's been there underneath. He's not, again, that can't be the easiest thing, because if you see how far this guy can throw the ball, it's like, wow, I mean, what an arm. But he's taken what the defenses have given, and I think that's been coached into him. I think Mike Yursich has done a really good job with him. Yursich was the guy who recruited him, and he's kind of Yursich's guy. I don't want that to come across the wrong way, but Bo Pribula, the other quarterback, he had already committed to Penn State. He was in the same class as Allar, but he had already committed before Yursich arrived, and he's been a good backup for them. But I think he's been coached to do that. Again, to going back to what I said about Franklin, it's okay if you throw the ball away and settle for, you give yourself the right to punt and then get after them on the next drive. But the question I think everybody's wondering, and that it became a bit of a thing last week when one of the reporters asked Franklin, do you ever just want to let him just chuck it down the field? And people are wondering, are they going to really let that loose? When are they going to let that loose, or are they ever going to let it loose? And I think they've been fortunate enough to be in a position through 6 games that they've not had to rely on it. But sooner or later, you're probably going to have to rely on it, and it could be this week. So that's going to be one of the really fun things to keep an eye on. When you look at so many of these big games across the nation, how many of them are impacted by explosive plays? And going back to where, I came in on this discussion, that's been one of the things that Penn State just hasn't had. And again, is it a matter of that you haven't needed them, or you're incapable of doing it? I think from a passing perspective, the ability is there, especially with Keandre Lambert-Smith and Harrison Walls, who's back and healthy. And we saw some things out of Theo Johnson, the tight end, last week that he's starting to get back into it. I think the tools are there, but let's see if they're able to put it together, especially against an outstanding Ohio State team.
And it's nice to see that Franklin took that question about the downfield passing very well and did not in any way expose that reporter.
Well, the one thing Corey Geiger, who I'm friends with, he admitted that it wasn't necessarily asked in the best possible way. But yeah, I think James might have. Obviously, something was bugging him about that. And but you know what? It's when you're in UMass week and you have a video clip that you can post that people are going to talk about, that wasn't Ohio State week where we're going to have, people just all over content the whole week. That actually was pretty fun for us. And I think they ended up burying the hatchet anyway. Franklin called them. And I think all of it's water under the bridge at this point.
With 2 defenses both ranked in the top 10 scoring in total yards, and Penn State, I think, number 1 nationally against the run, there's a thought that this could be twice in this century. We've had games that ended up 13-6 and 13-7 in this rivalry. Ohio State won one of them on the Gamble interception in Columbus in 2002, the national championship season. Penn State won one in Columbus on the Terrell Pryor fumble play there, the night game in 2008. Does this set up as one of those low-scoring games? The odds makers have Ohio State -4.5, over under 48.5. So they're thinking 26-22. Last year it was 44-31 or something absurd with 60-70 points scored. And we've seen that in some of these games in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, even with points scored. What is your thought of the tenor of this game? Is it going to be in the 20s, the 30s, or the 50s, or the 60s? What do you think?
I think it's going to be in each team scoring in the 20s.
Yeah.
I just think the days of those super low scoring games, I just think both teams have too many athletes, and even if an offense can't get it going, I think either of these defenses is capable of scoring. I think both teams have special teams guys who are capable of scoring. So I just think the days of 13 to 12 or whatever the hell some of those scores were are behind us. I just think both of these teams have too much talent for it to be that low scoring, Steve. So I think it's going to be both teams in the 20, but I do think both teams are really good defensively. And I think both teams are really well coached. One of the things to me about this game is, who's going to make the most mistakes. Penn State had its first offensive turnover of the season last week, and again, I just think that's one of those things with both of these teams. I haven't looked at Ohio State closely enough, but I know how good of a coach Ryan Day is, that, ball security is always gigantic. And I think that's going to be a big part of what goes down in this game. And the other thing that I will say is that I really loved what Day said after that Notre Dame game about people questioning Ohio State's toughness. This is from the outside, looking in. That's not something I ever looked at Ohio State and said. I don't know where that narrative came from, and I guess if it's from a couple games against Michigan or whatever. But I think most people at Penn State have always respected the level of toughness out of Ohio State, along with the athletic ability and the talent and everything else. And I think most people really respect Ryan Day as a coach as well.
All right, guys. Anything else for Mark?
I think we did about a half hour, so we've probably monopolized his day. He's just as busy as we are, so I'm sure we're all trying to get all of our preview stuff in. And Coach Franklin speaks tomorrow, correct?
Yes, 12:30. So we'll see
Yeah.
what he has to say. I asked him after the game against UMass, how do you think these first 6 games have kind of set Drew Allar up for the second half of the season, and especially going to play this level of opponent? And he immediately gave me the old, let me enjoy this win, and I'm not going to talk about Ohio State until Tuesday. But he did give a good answer about Allar and how the first 6 games. But so I was kind of funny. I was checking out your site and seeing guys within the program talking about the pending Penn State game. None of the Penn State people have done that. So talking about Ohio State. So they really wanted to enjoy that UMass win, as a homecoming, real special win over a fantastic opponent before looking ahead to the game that I think, by the third quarter of that game, everybody on our message board was already looking ahead to Ohio State, if not before even the UMass game. So it's going to be a fun week. Look forward to getting out there and covering another game.
Folks, this is the time to take a deep dive on both sides. So check out Mark's work at Lions247.com. Mark, we appreciate you stopping by and breaking things down for us.
Sounds good. Look forward to seeing everybody out there on Saturday.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Yep.
All right. Buckeyes Live typically on Wednesdays, this week on a Monday. So you got the full week to check back and everything we've got available here at the Voice of College Football. Tony, Buckeye Huddle, Buckeye Weekly. What's going on this week?
I'm going to be writing my Michigan Monday piece today. And then we'll talk to Ryan Day and Jim Knowles on Tuesday. And I don't want to call it Penn State week because that's a week that is, that's a name that is maybe reserved for Michigan in terms of having a school be that week, a Michigan week. This is the week that they play Penn State, so there'll be plenty of coverage of that game coming up.
Steve, what's going on this week?
Yeah, agreed. We got all kinds of stuff planned. I always take a deep dive look at the history of this rivalry, how colorful it is. It goes back to the early 1900s. There was a game one time where Penn State got a little rough and the Ohio State coach pulled the team off the field and in the second half, and that stood as the final score, whatever it was. It was lopsided at the time. And then Woody Hayes and Joe Paterno went head-to-head a couple of times, and those were some great battles. There was a Fiesta Bowl there in 1980, I believe, that season in December of 1980. The Fiesta Bowl pulled a big coup and got Ohio State and Penn State to play in their game. And that was right as Penn State was headed toward the first of 2 national championships in the 1980s. And they beat Art Schlichter and the Buckeyes in that game. And then, I was there in 1993. I've been at every one of these Ohio State, Penn State games since 1993, with the exception of 2001 when my wife was pregnant with my daughter, who's now 21. And so that was a historic game because Coach Paterno set the wins record that day. They came back from down they were down 18 or 19 points to Ohio State playing at home and came back and won that game. I forget the exact margin. It was more than 17. And so, they had that shot on television of the team putting Joe Paterno up on their shoulders at Jim Tressel, who, his dad was acquainted with Joe Paterno, his coaching legends. There's Jim Tressel, the first time he's got to coach against the legend, and the legend beats him to set a wins record. And Tressel, before he's really Jim Tressel, is standing off to the side, just waiting to try and shake poor Joe Paterno's hand. It was poor Jim Tressel at the time. But then Jim, of course, he won his share of games against Penn State, obviously, after that, and on up through the Urban Meyer situation, obviously, how he did against them. And the one loss out there in the night game was a tough one, obviously. But Ohio State's won 10 of the last 11 in this rivalry and dominated it 6 in a row. So they're looking to keep the train moving right on down the tracks and keep the winning streak going here on Saturday. So we're going to have all kinds of stuff about it going into the game. And I have not formulated a pick on this game yet. I imagine I will pick Ohio State to win the game in like a 24-21 type fashion, but God only knows. I got to study some more before I can make that pick.
The
I would say
1980. Go ahead,
yeah, I
Tony.
should say just be careful which year you're putting Joe Paterno up on your shoulders.
Yeah,
I want to do
no
it in
question.
2006 when he had to run
Yeah.
off the field.
Yeah, that wasn't good.
The 1980 Fiesta Bowl game was on Christmas Day. I remember being upset because we had to drive from home, spend Christmas at home, and then go to grandma's house. And I had to miss, like 20 or 25 minutes of the game en route. What's going on?
To heck with grandma. Grandma can wait.
Either, yeah, you make your travel plans before or after the game. But anyway, not a football family. I just broke the
Was
mold.
that
when
Todd
it came to
Blackledge?
that.
Was he the quarterback then?
No, that was it was
Chuck
between
Fusina?
No, it was Blackledge.
Blackledge. Okay.
It was
Anthony
Blackledge
Kurt
in 80.
Warner. Kurt
As
Warner
a
had a big
sophomore.
game.
Yep.
Yeah. My dog.
Absolutely. It was an entertaining game. All right, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Be here for Tony and for Steve all week. Get there. And I'm kind of curious as to whether anyone's tapped JT Tuimoloau on the shoulder this week to let him know, hey, this is the time to turn it on.
Boy,
All
he
right,
was
everyone.
a wrecking crew last year. My God, 2 interceptions, and he tipped a pass to Harrison for another one. My God, what a game.
It was crazy.
The greatest game any Ohio State defensive player has ever had, if not the greatest, it's in the top 10. I mean, crazy.
Folks, we appreciate you being here. Enjoy the game and make it on back next week.